Have you ever wondered why you keep falling for the same type of person over and over again? Why that charming narcissist seems irresistible while the genuinely kind person feels boring? Why your heart races for someone who's clearly wrong for you, but you feel nothing for someone who would actually treat you well? Carl Jung, the revolutionary Swiss psychiatrist, discovered something that will completely change how you see your relationships forever. What he found wasn't just about attraction. It was about the hidden forces in your unconscious mind that are literally programming you to choose the wrong people. And once you understand this, you'll never look at love the same way again. Stay with me, because in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to reveal the psychological mechanisms that have been controlling your romantic choices without you even knowing it. Carl Gustav Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, and what he discovered about relationships was revolutionary. Unlike other psychologists of his time, Jung realized that our romantic attractions aren't random. They're deeply connected to unconscious patterns that were formed in our earliest years. Jung believed that we don't just fall in love with people, we fall in love with missing pieces of ourselves. But here's the twist. These missing pieces aren't always healthy ones. Sometimes, we're unconsciously drawn to people who represent the very things that will hurt us, because our psyche is trying to resolve ancient wounds and conflicts. This isn't about blame or shame. It's about understanding. When you grasp these concepts, you gain the power to make conscious choices instead of being driven by unconscious compulsions. You can finally break free from destructive patterns and create the healthy relationships you actually deserve. Let's start with one of Jung's most important discoveries, the shadow. The shadow represents all the parts of ourselves that we rejected, denied, or hidden away. These are the aspects of our personality that we learned were unacceptable. Usually during childhood, here's where it gets fascinating. Jung discovered that we're often powerfully attracted to people who embody our shadow qualities. If you were raised to be good and compliant, you might find yourself irresistibly drawn to rebels and rule breakers. If you learn to suppress your emotions, you might be magnetically attracted to highly emotional, dramatic people. This attraction feels electric because you're encountering parts of yourself that you've lost touch with. The bad boy or bad girl represents the freedom and authenticity you've sacrificed. The emotionally volatile person represents the passion you've learned to suppress. But here's the problem. We're not just attracted to healthy expressions of these qualities. We're often drawn to the most extreme, destructive versions. The rebel becomes a narcissist who breaks all your boundaries. The passionate person becomes the unstable individual who creates chaos in your life. Why does this happen? Because your unconscious mind doesn't distinguish between healthy and unhealthy expressions of these shadow qualities. It just recognizes the energy signature of what you've been missing, and it pulls you toward it like a magnet. Think about your past relationships. Can you see patterns? The person who seemed so exciting because they were unpredictable, but that unpredictability eventually became unreliability. The confident person who initially seemed strong, but that confidence was actually narcissistic arrogance. This is your shadow at work, creating attractions that feel incredibly powerful but often lead to pain and disappointment. Now let's explore another crucial concept, projection. Jung discovered that we constantly project our unconscious contents onto other people, especially in romantic relationships. We see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves, both positive and negative. When you meet someone new and feel that instant, intense attraction, you're often not seeing them clearly. You're seeing your own projected material. You're seeing the idealized version of the qualities you wish you had, or the negative qualities you're trying to avoid in yourself. This is why the beginning of relationships can feel so magical and intense. You're not just falling in love with a person. You're falling in love with your own projections. The other person becomes a screen onto which you project your deepest desires, fears, and unconscious contents. But projections are inherently unstable. Reality has a way of breaking through fantasy. When the real person starts to emerge, with their actual flaws, limitations, and humanity, the projection collapses. This is often when people say things like they changed or they're not who I thought they were. The truth is, the person didn't change. Your projections lifted. Here's where it gets dangerous. We're often most likely to project onto people who are emotionally unavailable, mysterious, or somehow incomplete in our perception. These people become blank screens for our fantasies. The narcissist who reveals little about their true self becomes a perfect canvas for your idealized projections. The emotionally distant person becomes someone you can imagine transforming through your love. Meanwhile, emotionally available, genuine people don't trigger these projections as strongly. They're too real, too present, too human. Your projections can't stick to them as easily, so the relationship doesn't have that addictive, fantasy-like quality. This is why healthy people can sometimes feel boring at first. You're actually seeing them clearly without the distortion of intense projections. But our culture has conditioned us to mistake projection-based intensity for real love or chemistry. Understanding projection is crucial because it helps you recognize when you're in love with a fantasy versus when you're genuinely connecting with a real person. Jung introduced two more concepts that are essential for understanding romantic attraction: the anima and animus. The anima is a feminine aspect within men, while the animus is a masculine aspect within women. These are psychological structures that develop based on our early experiences with the opposite gender, primarily our parents. Here's the crucial point. We tend to be attracted to people who match our internal anima or animus image. If a man's anima was formed through experiences with an emotionally distant or critical mother, he might find himself repeatedly attracted to women who are emotionally unavailable or critical. If a woman's animus was shaped by an absent or unreliable father, she might be drawn to men who are unavailable or inconsistent. This isn't conscious. Your anima or animus operates from the unconscious, creating attractions that feel fated or destined. You meet someone and think this is it, but what you're really experiencing is a recognition of a familiar psychological pattern. The problem is that our anima or animus images are often based on wounded or incomplete relationships from our past. They're not necessarily healthy templates for mature love. They're more like psychological imprints of our earliest experiences with love, which may have been conditional, painful, or dysfunctional. This is why people often say they have a type, and why that type is often problematic. Your type isn't based on what's good for you. It's based on what's familiar to your unconscious mind, what matches your internal psychological structures. For example, if your early experience taught you that love involves drama, conflict, and uncertainty, then calm, stable people won't feel like love to you. They'll feel foreign, even though they're actually offering you something much healthier. The key is to become conscious of your anima or animus patterns. What kind of person are you consistently drawn to? What qualities do they share? And most importantly, how do these patterns connect to your early experiences with love and relationships? When you can see these patterns clearly, you can begin to make conscious choices rather than being driven by unconscious compulsions. Jung also discovered that we all have what he called complexes, clusters of emotions, memories, and associations that have a life of their own in our psyche. These complexes are often formed around early wounds or traumas, and they can be triggered by certain types of people or situations. When someone triggers one of your complexes, it creates an intense emotional reaction. This can feel like instant chemistry or connection, but it's actually your psyche responding to a familiar wound pattern. The person isn't necessarily right for you. They're just pushing psychological buttons that were installed long ago. For instance, if you have an abandonment complex from childhood, you might be intensely attracted to people who are somewhat emotionally distant or unavailable. Their unavailability triggers your abandonment fears, which creates a sense of urgency and intensity. Your psyche interprets this intensity as attraction or love, but it's actually anxiety and old pain being activated. Similarly, if you have a complex around feeling not good enough, you might be drawn to people who are critical or withholding with their approval. Their criticism triggers your complex, creating a compulsive need to win their validation. This feels like passionate love, but it's actually your psyche trying to resolve an old wound. The most dangerous aspect of complex-based attractions is that they're self-reinforcing. The more someone triggers your complex, the more intense your feelings become. This creates a psychological addiction. You mistake the pain of the trigger complex for the excitement of real love. Meanwhile, people who don't trigger your complexes might feel calm and peaceful to be around, but your psyche interprets this as boring or no chemistry. You become addicted to the emotional intensity of having your wounds triggered, mistaking it for passion. This is why therapy and self-awareness are so crucial. You need to understand your own complexes and triggers. What emotional patterns from your past are still running your present? What wounds are you unconsciously trying to heal through your relationships? When you can recognize when a complex is being triggered, you can pause and ask yourself, is this person actually good for me, or are they just pushing familiar buttons? One of the most common patterns Jung observed is what we might call the wounded healer dynamic. This is when you're unconsciously attracted to people who seem to need fixing or healing. You're drawn to their brokenness because it gives you a sense of purpose and value. This pattern often develops in childhood when you learn that your worth was tied to taking care of others' emotional needs. Perhaps you had a depressed parent, an addicted family member, or siblings who needed constant attention. You learn that love meant rescuing others, and you develop an identity around being a helper, the fixer, the one who saves people. As an adult, healthy, self-sufficient people don't trigger this pattern. They don't need you to save them, which can make you feel unnecessary or unimportant. But someone who's struggling, dramatic, or clearly damaged, they make you feel needed and valuable. They give you a role to play. The problem is that people who are genuinely committed to being victims or staying broken will resist your efforts to help them. They need their drama and dysfunction. It's part of their identity. So you end up in relationships where you're constantly trying to fix someone who doesn't actually want to be fixed. This becomes a form of psychological addiction. The more they resist your help, the harder you try. The more unstable they are, the more indispensable you feel. You mistake this intense emotional labor for love, but it's actually codependency. Jung would say that in these situations, you're trying to heal your own wounds through someone else. You're projecting your own inner brokenness onto them and trying to fix it externally. But healing doesn't work that way. You can't heal your own wounds by fixing someone else's. The solution is to recognize this pattern and ask yourself, am I attracted to this person because they're good for me or because they make me feel needed? Am I choosing partners based on their potential or their reality? So how do you break free from these unconscious patterns and create healthy relationships? Jung's answer was simple but not easy. You must become conscious of your unconscious. First, you need to do the inner work of understanding your own psychological patterns. What are your shadow qualities? What does your anima or animus look like? What complexes get triggered in relationships? What wounds are you unconsciously trying to heal through others? This requires honest self-reflection and often support therapy or other forms of inner work. You need to reclaim the parts of yourself that you projected onto others. You need to heal your own wounds instead of trying to heal them through relationships. Second, you need to learn to distinguish between unconscious attraction and conscious choice. Unconscious attraction is intense, immediate, and often based on familiar psychological patterns. Conscious choice is based on compatibility, shared values, emotional maturity, and genuine care for each other's well-being. This doesn't mean that conscious relationships are passionless or boring. It means that the passion is based on authentic connection rather than psychological wounding. It means you're choosing someone because they're genuinely good for you, not because they trigger familiar patterns. Finally, you need to develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold a tension between opposites and find a new way forward. Instead of being driven by either your wounds or your defenses, you learn to make choices from a place of wholeness and consciousness. This is a path to what Jung would call conscious love, relationships based on seeing and accepting each other as whole human beings, rather than as projections of our unconscious needs and wounds. Remember, understanding these patterns isn't about judgment or blame. It's about freedom. When you understand why you've been drawn to the wrong people, you can finally start choosing the right ones. The next time you feel that instant, intense attraction to someone, pause and ask yourself, what is this person triggering in me? Are they good for me, or do they just feel familiar? The answer might surprise you, and it might just change your life. If this video opened your eyes to new possibilities in your relationships, make sure to subscribe for more insights into the hidden workings of a human psyche. And remember, consciousness is the first step toward freedom.